Kia ora everyone, te he mauri ora, i ngā mana, i ngā reo, i o rangatira mā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko mangawhā ta maunga, ko tamaki ta awa, ko ahia toko iwi, ko Doc Edge e good pitch te mana, te waka, ko Alex the Ahau. Welcome everyone, welcome everyone. It's really lovely to have you all here. We're in the second workshop of the Good Pitch Impact Workshops, the future of impact producing, in conjunction with both Doc Edge and Doc Society. So I'd like to welcome everyone. I'd like to also welcome our guests today. On the first, you will see that there are 3 people joining us today. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to welcome Anna Kaplan all the way from Australia. She's recently been freed, as you know, from Melbourne. So it's lovely that she can join us. Anna Kaplan is responsible for the impact campaigns for both the Sugar Film and 2040. And she is a very well-respected impact producer and certainly showing the way in Australia. So welcome. We're really excited to hear about what it is that you'll be doing. I will talk more about the background of each speaker as we go through each of the different parts of the sessions. And then we have our New Zealand cohort, which is Alex Reid and Tamar Munch. Alex is the producer of The Girl on the Bridge, and Tamar has been looking after all the impact work in The Girl on the Bridge. As we all know, The Girl on the Bridge features our own Jazz Thornton, a celebrity in some ways in terms of what she's achieved, but more importantly, she is an impact maker because of the work that she's doing in the area of suicide awareness. And it's wonderful to be able to have all 3 of you here. All the films that we've mentioned are really important impact producing films in terms of outcomes, in terms of what it is that we can do to change people's minds about things and issues, which is really important. So first of all, I just want to do some housekeeping. I don't know how many of you have been familiar with Zoom, but if you're not, you will notice that at the bottom of the screen, there's the opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you have any questions anytime throughout the session, please go in there, type in your question, and we'll bring the questions together at the end, and we'll engage in a conversation with our panelists. At some point through the session, you will be able to see videos, and you'll be able to see screen shares. And we will also try to share with you the links that the various panelists might be showing. So we will send it out to you if you've registered for this particular workshop. Without any further ado, I mean, I'll get the panelists over to say hi and maybe put on your mic and say hi everyone, if you like.
Hello, I'm Tamar.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex.
I realised our names are the wrong way around on the, potentially our names are the wrong way around on the screen. Anyway,
Tamar.
I'm Tamar, that's all.
And I'm Anna, and it's great to be here. Really excited to share some learnings with you all.
Well, thank you very much. I think that we will move to the first part of our workshop, which is I'd like to call Anna Kaplan to talk about her work in relation to the 2 films that I mentioned. She'll talk a little bit more about what she has done and in terms of her own experience, how she got to where she is. But don't mind if I stare a little bit to the side, just to give a little bit of background. Anna is an English-Australian producer and impact strategist with over 15 years of screen industry experience, distribution, production, and industry development. She started out at the BBC. She worked extensively in independent production and distribution in the UK and Australia. In 2014, she joined the production arm of Madman Entertainment to lead the impact campaign for writer-director Damon Gamel's feature documentary That Sugar Film. Supported by Good Pitch Australia, the film broke new ground for social impact documentaries in Australia and inspired audiences around the globe to change their relationship with sugar. I know I did when I watched the film. Most recently, Anna produced and is leading the global impact campaign for Damon's latest film, 2040. This innovative hybrid documentary premiered at the 2019 Berlinale, grossed over 1.5 million in the Australian box office, and continues to inspire audiences around the world to take action for a more sustainable future. Building on the successful 5-year partnership, Anna has recently co-founded Regan Studios with director Damon Gemio to focus on producing and amplifying purpose-driven content. So welcome, Anna, and I'll let you take the stage.
Thanks, Alex, and hi again, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which I live and work, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and I acknowledge their deep and ongoing connection to and custodianship of this land. A huge thank you to Good Pitch New Zealand for hosting this event. I've been specialising in impact producing for over a decade now, and I've had a close association with Good Pitch Australia since 2014 through my work on That Sugar film and also The Hunting Ground, Dying to Live, and most recently 2040. So I got a pretty good handle on the power of the Good Pitch model. And for this session, I'm going to be focusing primarily on 2040, and then towards the end, I'll share some more general insights into different approaches to impact and the role of the impact producer. 2040, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a visual love letter from my colleague Damon to his daughter Velvet, who was 5 at the time of filming. And in the film, Damon travels the world exploring the best solutions to climate change. He meets the people and the communities pioneering these solutions and discovers the benefits that they're reaping by doing so. And then using high-end visual effects and constructed sequences, we jump into the future to show Velvet and her generation a vision of what their lives could look like in 2040 if we were to fully embrace and rapidly scale these solutions over the next 2 decades. We call it an exercise in fact-based dreaming, as everything that Damon shows us in the future has to already exist in some form today. And we're just going to play the trailer for you now, please, Keith.
My name is Damon, and this is my daughter Velvet. Her major concern right now is the elusive art of sleep direction. But soon, she'll have to face a rapidly deteriorating environment.
The ice sheet is now melting faster than the scientists predicted.
I think there's room for a different story, a story that focuses on the solutions to some of these problems. So in 2040, what will the world look like for our daughter if we just embrace the best that already exists?
Instead of having governments that are reacting to disaster, we need governments and businesses that actually take us off in a different direction.
Maybe it's farming, or it can be energy, it can be housing, or empowering girls.
I'd like to see deforestation being stopped.
Oh, that would be so cool. That'd be awesome.
Just be respectful to Earth.
Imagine Velvet. We adopted regenerative practices like phrases, pulling the carbon into the soil and making it healthier.
That's right, yeah.
And we embrace efficient local energy.
Bangladesh has 5 million solar home systems. They have that power in their own hands. This is bringing people together.
But here I am sitting on an aeroplane that is spewing out carbon. You can't help but be a hypocrite because our entire system is built on fossil fuels.
What were you guys thinking?
Well, sometimes we weren't.
The power of innovation, imagination, creativity, this is within all people.
People want to be working on something that they can see is actually helping to regenerate the world.
Everywhere you look, you will see incredible reasons for hope.
You could feed 10 billion people with the protein from marine permaculture alone.
Wow. Not only are there so many people who want to take part in telling a new story, we have everything we need right now to make it happen. What's your 2040?
I just want the future to be good.
So it's a very aspirational and hopeful film that takes a playful and accessible approach. And the approach is really underpinned by neuroscience. During development, Damon reached out to an environmental psychologist in the US called Renee Lertzman, really wanting to understand why he often felt it's so hard to kind of keep reading really heavy articles about the climate emergency and where we're heading, why he found himself clicking away when he deeply cares. And what Renee explained to him is that when we're constantly bombarded with images that are sort of tinged, laden with fear and dread, and they actually activate a part of our brain called the limbic system. And that is where we go into fight or flight. And that essentially overrides your prefrontal cortex, which is where we do our creative thinking and our problem solving. So when we're only focusing on the negative, we actually paralyze people from taking action. So we really wanted to, I guess, do an experiment in climate communication and really flip that and focus on not focus on what we're fighting against, but what we're fighting for, that really positive vision of where we want to get to. The other thing that we were really careful with was making sure the film wrote a really apolitical line. We talk about vested interests, we talk about the need for better leadership, but we don't get into partisan politics. And the other aspect of the approach was to really put young people, children's voices front and center in the film, and have Damon's vision for the future guided by young people. So as we were filming around the world, we filmed in 12 different countries. We interviewed over 100 school-aged children aged 6 to 11 and asked them what they would like to see in the future when they're young adults in 2040. And they shared their beautiful hopes and dreams and ideas, and even inventions that they wanted to create. One young girl told us that she wanted to invent rocket boots that are powered by plants, and that she wants them to go global. So at one point in the film, in the section where we talk about transport, we actually have Damon in his rocket boots taking off. And so, it was very much, speaking to what the children were asking for. We started our impact vision is a world where people are mobilized to learn about, advocate for, contribute to regenerative solutions that improve the well-being of the planet, of all people and all living systems. And our impact goals are sort of those 4 key pillars that you can see on screen: change the story, activate agency, move the money, and shift the policy. When the film was selected for Good Pitch Australia in late 2016, we were in very early development, and Melinda Wink and the Good Pitch team here provided us with really invaluable mentoring and support for the design and then implementation of a really ambitious 3-year global impact campaign. This included introductions to key strategic partners. On our table at Good Pitch, we had the Executive Director of Greenpeace Australia Pacific. We had the Chief Economist from the Australia Institute, a think tank here in Australia. We had the CEO of the Foundation for Young Australia, the Head of Impact Investing at Ernst & Young, and also the Marketing Director of Tesla here in Australia. After Good Pitch, the team hosted story labs with key advisors. We had a number of strategy workshops with our Brains Trust of advisors. And of course, they also helped to broker really significant philanthropic funding for both film production and for impact. And that actually came in at over $2 million Australian dollars. So really significant funding, really terrific support. We really designed the film to be an entry point into an ecosystem of climate action and advocacy. And the real goal of the campaign is to inspire and enable audiences wherever they are and wherever they're at to help bring to life and scale many of the solutions depicted in the film. Partnerships were really critical to us. We're working with just under 50 partner organizations globally, And we really took a cross-sector approach, mapping out stakeholders in all of our sort of solution pillars. We structured the film around 6 key solution pillars, being energy, transport, agriculture, oceans, economics, and educating and empowering women and girls. And our partnerships really span the political, private, and social spectrum. And we've built a really broad network of entrepreneurs and change makers, impact investors, environmental campaigners, educators, economists, and technologists, all of whom are advocating for and scaling solutions to the climate emergency. We started building out the campaign and those partnerships while we were in production, in fact, while we were in development, and started sort of mapping out what our calls to action would be around each of those key solution pillars. We finished up the film in late 2018, and then we held a series of stakeholder preview screenings and strategy sessions with key partners, funders, and advisors in Australia, the US, and the UK. And then really from late 2018 onwards through to middle of 2019, when we released theatrically in Australia, we were intensively developing the campaign and building out our suite of tools and resources. And an example of one of the really amazing partners who we worked really deeply with across the whole journey was Intrepid Travel. Intrepid are Australia's, I think actually the world's largest responsible carbon neutral travel company. And they came on board as an early funder at Good Pitch. And then we partnered, they actually were our travel partner for the production. So really helped us with logistics and getting our crew around the world and our 300 kilos of gear. And they were just a terrific support through that process. They partnered with our distributor, Madman, for the theatrical release and provided marketing support and prizes, that were all kind of wrapped into the theatrical marketing campaign. And they were particularly excited by the seaweed solution that we explore in the film. And so we were able to develop a partnership with them to launch a crowdfunding campaign that tied in with the theatrical release. And the goal of that campaign was to bring the marine permaculture seaweed solution that we feature in the film to Australia and into Australian waters, and really accelerate efforts to regenerate Tasmania's giant kelp forests that have been pretty much decimated due to the warming oceans down there. And I might just ask Keith to play the seaweed clip now, because that'll probably give you a better idea of that project than I could give you verbally.
Until recently, large seaweed forests ran along many of the world's coastlines. They provided habitats for marine life, local food and jobs, and made for terrific fake beards. But with most of the heat from global warming going into our oceans, much of this seaweed has been wiped out, including 95% of kelp along the east coast of Tasmania. But there is a solution. Scientists have discovered a way to regenerate the seaweeds. They pump cooler, nutrient-rich water from the deep ocean and disperse it over a seaweed-growing platform near the surface.
Seaweeds actually draw down carbon dioxide from the ocean waters, and they restore the alkalinity of the ocean that enables shellfish and other creatures to thrive.
Apart from restoring ecosystems, seaweed could also play a crucial role in reversing global warming.
Well, this is an example of brown seaweed. The fastest brown seaweeds will grow 0.5 meter per day.
Hang on. 0.5 meter a day?
0.5 meter a day, and they'll grow over 50 meters long.
Is that one of the fastest growing plants in the world?
It is the fastest growing tree on the planet.
Wow, okay. So that's why the understanding that it's going to be pulling carbon out of the atmosphere very quickly,
yes,
because it grows so fast.
Thousands of tons of carbon per square kilometer per year.
But this humble weed has even more to offer. Seaweed is good for food, fertiliser, biofuels, plastics, healthy omega-3s, fibres for clothes, nutraceuticals, for feeding to cattle to lower their methane, and of course, fake beards. 2040 is collaborating with the Climate Foundation, the University of Tasmania and the Intrepid Foundation to launch Australia's first seaweed platform in Storm Bay near Hobart. But we need your help. For every $1 you donate today, the Intrepid Foundation will match that $1. So together, we have an opportunity to make Australia a world leader in this exciting climate solution. So donate now and help the regeneration.
So that campaign ultimately raised over $670,000, and that was over a period of a year, but we got to the initial target of $350,000 within the first 3 months of the campaign. So that was while the film was still in cinemas. And, you know, we had some amazing partners who hosted their own discrete fundraisers and raised $50,000 out of the total. So a lot of people were very excited about seaweed, as am I personally. It was one of our really aha solutions that most of us had never heard of before we started working on this film. That kelp breeding program down at UTAS is well underway. We were able to go down and visit in December, and they've been able to plant some warm adapted kelp species that they've been growing in the lab out on some test lines that are attached to some aquaculture infrastructure down in Storm Bay. There's salmon farms down there, and they're really, the science that they're doing is really analysing what impact the high nutrient environment with all the runoff from that salmon farm, what impact that has on the kelp. And actually what it's done is it's turbocharged their growth. So that's a really great sign. And the project's been a little bit impacted by COVID and travel restrictions, but that test platform will actually be deployed next year, which is really fantastic. Education is another key part of our campaign. One of our impact goals is changing the story, and we really invested significant resources in the education space, as we knew from our research that teachers were really desperate for positively framed content that they could use in the classroom. Sustainability sits across the whole curriculum here in Australia, and you know, we knew that teachers were really you know, seeking that content that they could teach in the classroom without actually inducing eco-anxiety in their students. We partnered with Cool Australia, who are education specialists, to develop a very comprehensive package of free curriculum resources mapped to the film. There are 31 learning modules, which you can see on screen now. And then there are 40 short clips from the film, which are, you know, tailored for classroom use, that are embedded into those lessons, and then a school action toolkit as well. And that package as well is also structured around those 6 key solution pillars that I mentioned earlier. And they're really learning recipes for teachers that are mapped to upper primary and secondary curriculum. They were launched at a series of free teacher preview screenings that we held in the lead up to our theatrical release. We really wanted to give teachers that sort of sneak peek and make them feel really special, and engage deeply with them so that they knew what was coming in terms of those resources and some of our engagement initiatives for schools. And I think we had about 2,000 teachers nationally attend those previews. And then we staggered the release of the lessons across the release timeline. So we had a first release ready to go for the theatrical release, and then we released the next batch to tie in with the home entertainment release. We released our science module to tie in with National Science Week. So really staggering that so we could keep engaging with teachers through you know, through their unions and professional associations, through our partners, and through social media as well. In terms of distribution, so as Alex mentioned, the film premiered at the Berlinale in early 2019, and then had a short festival run, screening at a number of international festivals early last year, before the theatrical release here in Australia in May. We led into the theatrical with a month-long national cinema tour of 50 Q&A screenings around the country, and that really helped build word of mouth and activate a range of partners and affiliate groups around the release. We had guest speakers at every screening, as well as Damon, and that they ranged from contributors from the film to representatives of some of our partners and some of our key advisors who are also thought leaders and experts. And we focused on different solution themes in different locations. So when we were in rural areas, regional areas, we really focused on agriculture, for example. The film then opened in late May on 95 screens nationally. Here in Australia, there was a mix of independent, art house and multiplexes. And that release was really bolstered by a very strong PR campaign and strategic outreach conducted by our impact team and some of our partners to really activate schools and local communities, align businesses and affiliate groups. And we also tapped into the family market. We really pitched the film at a family audience, and that dovetailed really well with the burgeoning school strike for climate movement, the youth climate movement, which was really gaining momentum around that time, middle of last year. We partnered with 50 cinemas to offer free entry for school students across the opening weekend, and that was a good news story that really helped to activate our partners. It was a good hook for media and resulted in a very strong opening weekend take of over $400,000. That led to more cinemas coming on board due to the strong box office performance, and we ultimately expanded the release to a 22-week run over 150 screens, which is huge for a local documentary. As Alex mentioned, we took about 1.6 million at the local box office, which meant that we clocked in at the #1 documentary and the #9 Australian film at the box office here in 2019. And then alongside the traditional cinema and festival release, our impact team were of course rolling out hundreds of screenings with key partners and influencers and working collaboratively to maximize our impact. That included screenings and presentations at the UN Climate Action Summit. We gave them some clips of the film, some of the future shots, and they mapped it to the walls of the General Assembly for the opening video that was screened to all the world leaders at that summit. So that was pretty exciting. And Damon spoke at the Youth Climate Summit that ran alongside, and we did a number of other screenings during that week, both in New York and Washington. We held various parliamentary screenings. We held screenings in corporate offices and boardrooms, cultural institutions, town halls, university campuses, and of course, schools. Over 40 Australian local councils have hosted community screenings, sparking town hall discussions, community visioning forums, and climate emergency declarations. Just give you a little bit of an overview of the sort of reach. So as I mentioned before, that box office result, so our cinemas across ANZ was over 250, and then we have released in a number of other territories theatrically. So we've screened in over 300 cinemas in the rest of the world outside ANZ. About 150 of those cinema screenings have had Q&A events, and Damon's done over 50 school visits with Q&As and presentations. We're now over 500 community and corporate screenings, and the film has also done pretty well in terms of the home end release, and was widely available on airlines, and has had broadcasts here in Australia and a number of other territories. Damon also wrote a companion book for the film called 2040, A Handbook for the Regeneration, and that's published by Pan Macmillan and has sold over 20,000 copies. And I'll talk a little bit more about our personal climate action plans in a minute. But in terms of our sort of reach online, we've had over 3 billion online trailer views. We've got a large following on social media across Facebook, Insta, Twitter, that comes in around 120K. Some of our posts can get up to 10 million organic reach on Facebook. That's not a regular occurrence, but it's happened a handful of times, which in the current world of algorithms and Facebook working really hard to make sure that we're paying for reach, we were pretty excited to be able to get that kind of reach with organic posts. We have quite a lot of traffic to our website, and we also, particularly since in this year, in the COVID era, we've really shifted a lot of what we're doing into the digital space. We're hosting lots of webinars and Facebook Live events, and then we've also produced over 65 campaign videos for release on web and social, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. I'm just going to switch over to the 2040 website and talk a little bit about the tools and the content that we have created to support our audience to take action for climate. So the campaign was we've really worked hard to design very curated pathways to action to enable our audience to donate to volunteer for, to amplify, or to advocate for the particular solutions that they connected with in the film. We take this personalized approach, and we really tried to meet our audience where they are at on their climate action journey. Some of our audience we knew would be very, very engaged already, and others would be just starting to get involved. So we really wanted to have a number of different actions, both low and mid barrier, and then those higher barrier actions for the more engaged segment of our audience. Like with everything else we've done with the film, with our education package, again, the campaign is structured around those 6 key solution pillars of energy, ag, transport, oceans, economy, and educating and empowering women and girls. When you land on our website, and in fact, there's actually a call to action at the end of the film that invites you to come over to the website and join the regeneration. You see a button to activate your plan. And when you do that, it will take you through a little quiz that will help us learn a bit more about you and serve up actions that are tailored to you. So we partnered with an organization called Purpose to build this tool. They actually developed this tool for the midterm elections in the US, and we were able to adapt it into the world's first personalized climate action planning tool. So first thing it asked me is, have I seen the film? So I say yes, and then I've seen the film hundreds of times. Then it asked me which of the solutions I got most excited about. So, and there's a little bit more information about each of those solution pillars, and you click on the little eye. So I'm going to select marine regeneration, that's the seaweed solution. I'm going to select energy, and I'm going to select regen ag. Then it asked me to tell a little bit about myself, share a little bit about myself. So I'm a storyteller, I'm a parent, I have a bank account, I have a garden, and I'm a thinker. And then it asked me how much time I might have to be able to get involved, to contribute. And I'm pretty busy, so I'm going to say I've got 1 weekend a month. And then how much money could I contribute? I'm going to say $100. Then I'll tell where I am and my postcode. And I'm just going to put a test in here so that we know to delete it. And essentially that will now spit me out my own personalized action plan. And while it's doing that, I'll share a few fun facts. Thinking about it. I think because I selected 3 different solutions, it's taking a little bit longer. There we go. So I've now joined the regeneration, and here are 6 things that I can do straight away. I can join my local fossil-free group. I can switch my search engine to Ecosia, which is a search engine that diverts the ad revenue from your searches to planting trees around the world. We've got a partnership with them where we can see how many trees our community have planted through searching with Ecosia. I can get involved in funding the seaweed solution. I can gift a tree through Greening Australia, and I can take the ethical paper pledge because I'm based in Victoria. And then you also get a badge which you can download and add to your social media accounts as your profile pic, or you could put it in your signature or do whatever you want with it. And then we also encourage people to share their plan and what they're doing with their networks. So as you can see, it's really about tailoring to people's interests, their passion, where they're at, and really trying to activate agency by encouraging and supporting individuals, organizations and businesses to get involved in our action campaign and go across and take action with our partners. When you click on those calls to action, it will take you across to the relevant partners page, website, and we have tracking affiliate links set up. So we're getting constant reporting back from our partners so that we are able to measure and also share the impact that the community are having by getting involved through the action plan. I'm just gonna take you back to our homepage where we have a dashboard of our key impact metrics. So if you scroll down to just below the header, we can see that we have raised well over $1.5 million for scaling climate solutions. We've planted nearly 25,000 trees through the Ecosia partnership. We've had nearly 25,000 people activate their plan. Over 25,000 teachers have downloaded our lesson plans, and that extrapolates out to over 1 million school-aged children engaging with the film in the classroom. We track how many action partners we're working with, and then the farmers registered metric is one of our partners, Carbonate, actually has a program that pays farmers to transition to regenerative ag practices and actually has a payment for farmers to get them through that transition that's pegged to the percentage that they can increase the carbon in their soil. So we've had over 360 farmers who've already embarked on that journey, and many more, who are, engaging with Carbonate and looking like they will get involved. We also, that whole changing the story piece of our campaign, we produce a high volume of both campaign content and short form stories. It's really about keeping or inspiring people to get involved with the calls to action, reporting back on the outcomes, and then also profiling the amazing change makers around the world who are just rolling up their sleeves and getting on with the job of transitioning to a more regenerative future. We are actually launching a series next week we launched it last week, called Stories from the Regeneration, where we profile a regenerator every week and share their work. And it's really, it's the Rebecca Solnit, Hope in the Dark. There's so much media attention on the big circus, the spotlights on the circus. And of course, we all know that negativity is what, creates clicks and sells subscriptions, and but actually there's a whole heap of amazing work happening in the shadows, and that changing the narrative piece is really about shifting the spotlight to the shadows and the great work that's already underway. And then we also create content that is about reporting back to our audience and showing them that by getting involved and taking action through the action tool, through their personal action plan, they're actually part of a bigger community. And when we all take those actions together, we can actually achieve great things in quite a short period of time. So we do these impact wrap-up videos every 3 months where we essentially report back to our audience. It's a positive feedback loop to show them that what they're doing is making a difference. Could we play the wrap-up, please, Keith? Not sure what's going on there. Thanks, Keith. So I might just talk a little bit about what we're working on now, and then I'm going to move into sort of some more general insights into impact producing. We've seen some really amazing engagement in the corporate sector, and we've had a number of corporates who have already hosted screenings and use them as to engage their, whether it's their external stakeholders like their customers or their clients or their partners or their internal teams with their sustainability journey. And so we really saw a need for a structured program that not only gave those corporates access to the film, but access to Damon and our team. And we built a really robust corporate climate action toolkit, and essentially that is a program that corporates pay to sign up to. We have 3 different tiers. I'm just gonna share my screen again, if you just bear with me. I'm not sure if you can see my screen at the moment. Sorry, just having a little technical issue here. I'm not sure what you can see right now. So if any of the organisers could just give me a little verbal cue of what's on screen, that would be really helpful.
You can see it.
The corporate program?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So our corporate program is really about supporting businesses on their climate action journey and helping them grow their commitment to climate action. Our tagline is "Together we can make climate action everyone's business." And there are a number of benefits that corporates get access to, but essentially they choose which package is going to work best for them based on where they're at and of course their budget. And so that really, the climate advocate tier is really about engaging with the film. Then the climate champion is a sort of deeper engagement with longer access to the film and a Q&A with Damon, and a copy of the book and some other bits and pieces. And then there's the sort of top of the top tier climate guardian part of the program, which is really for those businesses who are leading the way and are the shining lights in their own sectors, and working deeply with them to help them inspire other businesses in their own sectors to follow suit. And then we have a number of optional extras that they can choose from to create a package that's going to be meaningful for them. And a few logos should pop up on screen as an example of some of the businesses we've worked with, but I don't think that's going to happen. Sorry about that. The other thing that we're working on really intensively at the moment is political engagement. That has been interrupted by COVID, but we are kind of back onto that now. Big focus is trying to avert a gas-fired recovery from economic recovery here in Australia. We've done a lot of work supporting Zali Steggall, who's an independent MP in the seat of Warringah, who actually unseated Tony Abbott, our ex-Prime Minister, at the last election, and she was campaigning on a climate platform, and she's introducing a Climate Act bill, private members bill, into Parliament on Tuesday. We've been doing a huge amount of work trying to build the sort of community social license for that bill, and also just generally building climate support strategically with our partners leading into the next federal election, which will either be late next year or early the year after. So I might just finish up by just sort of reiterating that our experiences working with Good Pitch, with 2040 and that sugar film, have really shown us that with the right strategy and a very aligned and nurtured coalition of partners and sufficient campaign resources, that these sort of feature documentaries can be enormously powerful tools for positive change. And that's, I guess, a good segue into talking more generally about the impact producer skill set and some of the essential campaign ingredients as I see it. I have a slight issue because I can't stop sharing my screen. So if anyone's able to do that for me in the back end, that would be really helpful, but I actually can't see. Great, thank you. So impact campaigns, they can really vary greatly from one film to another. Each will have a different set of moving parts, and they are highly customized. But there are some, critical ingredients for success. That's clear vision and objectives or goals, a strategic action plan, appropriate resources to sustain the scale and the duration of the campaign, and then, of course, that framework for measuring progress and success against those defined goals. And as filmmakers, your goals might include amplifying the work of an existing social movement or campaign. You might be seeking to influence a national conversation. You might be looking to empower marginalized communities, or change consumer behavior, or trigger policy changes. You might be doing deeper work and looking to facilitate healing in communities, fostering inclusion, or just generally galvanizing individuals or specific communities or constituent groups around your issue area. The tactics and methods that filmmakers tend to employ to achieve these goals might include traditional PR, TV, online and print advertising. I mean, obviously at the higher budget end of the scale, and usually working symbiotically with the distributor. So a lot of that funded through the P&A, but sort of augmented by the impact campaign. Event screenings with facilitated discussions and toolkits to support screening hosts if they're going it alone. Strategic partnerships, online engagement via web, digital and social media platforms, developing bespoke content or repurposing footage from the film or from third parties, utilizing celebrities and influencers in your campaign. You might be seeking to do, to have a really strong focus on educational outreach like we did with 2040 and that sugar film. You might be looking to engage, the political decision makers around that can impact the issue area, or it might be a more sort of traditional grassroots campaign. So really, there's a whole toolkit of tactics available, and it's really about identifying what's going to work best to help you achieve your goals, and also being realistic about your resources and your capacity. Who generally does this work? In Australia, the vast majority of impact producers operate as freelancers, and we have got like a reasonable sized cohort of experienced impact producers, largely thanks to Good Pitch, and us having the opportunity to really flex our muscles working on some of these bigger, well-resourced campaigns. And then some of us, have the privilege of actually being embedded within the production itself, or within the company, or within the distributor. For a long time, I was embedded at Madman. I actually worked in-house there, and that allowed me to work really, really closely and symbiotically with our distributor. Some impact producers come from a film background, either production or marketing or exhibition. Others come, more from activism, or they might, be strategists or work in marketing and communications more generally. Some filmmakers are lucky enough to have the resources to hire a dedicated impact producer, but then in other instances, the resources aren't there, and so someone inside the film team, often the director or the producer, will share that impact producer role. And for smaller scale projects and budgets, you might even just bring in an experienced impact producer as a consultant on a short-term basis to help develop and refine specific aspects of the strategy, and then it's actually handed back to the team to implement. It's a pretty broad skill set that you'll need to draw on for this work, and I'm going to run through a list, but this isn't by no means exhaustive. You may, as I said before, want to concentrate all of this work in the hands of that dedicated impact producer, or you might bring in people with specialist skills at different points in the campaign. First step is obviously devising your strategy, your objectives and your key activities, because that will obviously impact or inform how much you need to raise, and what other resources you require, and it'll also inform some of your partnerships. Someone needs to really focus on that central message, and the impact that you want the film to have on audiences, and then map out the steps to get there. So that's that theory of change that I know Good Pitch is very good at communicating in workshops, so I won't go into it too deeply. But the key part of that is mapping your issue area before you develop your strategy, because that really helps you identify the current needs of the movement that you might be working within or alongside, and also assess the role that the film can play in supporting and amplifying what's already happening in the space. And it also helps you to really figure out, what are your timelines going to look like, what resources are you going to require, and what partnerships you need to develop to make that happen. Someone needs to take responsibility for the impact budget and for funding and managing your relationship with your funders, your donors. So that's scoping out the resources required to deliver on the strategy, and then that gets translated into a budget and a cash flow, so you can see what funds you'll need at which points in the campaign. And someone will also need to manage the fundraising side of things, and funding sources, as I'm sure a lot of you would know through other Good Pitch workshops, is, that might include grants, individual donations, corporate sponsorship, in-kind support, and then crowdfunding. Distribution is really critical, and you really do need to have a good understanding of how distribution works, and that's regardless of whether you're going it alone or working with a distributor. If you're working with a distributor, you are working within a sort of a defined system, and there are constraints, and sometimes there's tension around that. So having really robust, open discussions with the distributor about expectations and requirements for the campaign as early as possible will help to smooth that journey. And, you really need to be able to collaborate and negotiate with your distributor so that you get outcomes that work both for the film and for the campaign, because sometimes there can be competing goals. And, I really encourage a diplomatic approach, because, if you've got your distributor behind you, the possibilities of reach and exposure and building that groundswell of awareness are, absolutely magnified. Partner and stakeholder management, that as you build your campaign and you get more partners on board, they may be your funders, your allies and advocates that you're working with, influencers, sponsors. Someone has to actually manage those relationships and keep everyone informed of what's going on, and then be able to effectively mobilize that network as required. And it's much easier to do if you are in regular contact and making people feel like they are very much part of the campaign, rather than just calling on them when you need them. And then it's also really critical that you document what you've agreed with your partners, so that everyone's on the same page. And as I said before, that reporting back is also really important. So political lobbying is a pretty specialist skill, it's also, networks are really important in that space. So you might, if that's one of your goals, might want to find someone who has really solid experience in that particular tactical art form. Obviously publicity is really key as well. We're trying to, change hearts and minds and get our message out there. So, really seeding what you're doing with the impact campaign as you're publicizing the film. Usually when you're publicizing your film, you're telling the story of why you made it and the filmmaking journey, but there's actually a really great opportunity to start seeding those impact goals and make that part of, the change you want to create, part of the story you're pitching to journalists. Online communities are a blessing and a curse. They need to be very carefully managed and coordinated. And of course, it does cross over with that traditional film marketing. And a lot of those key communication channels will need to be utilized by the distributor, or for, so general film marketing as well. So just making sure that that's all been discussed, and there you're not kind of overlapping at points where actually one objective needs to be, kind of given priority. And that role of community management can either be managed by one person, or it can be spread across a team of moderators. Or you might even work with an external digital agency or one of your outreach partners to execute specific elements of your digital or social strategy. And then, of course, there's the data caption and evaluation piece. So really thinking from, as you're building the strategy, how, what are your data points? How are you going to measure success? How are you going to capture the narrative of the impact that you're having? How are you going to tell the story? It's really essential that you do that from as early on as possible, because that data is really valuable in helping you to fundraise, to build more partnerships, and of course, to keep your audience actively engaged with the campaign. I think I'm over time, so I'm just going to finish up with a few top tips to leave you with. As I mentioned before, that viewing the film and the impact strategy as two distinct but interconnected projects. So, a really well-designed impact campaign will augment and dovetail with and extend your marketing strategy. But your marketing strategy is really going to be calibrated towards your core audience, your choir, the people that want to see your film and they're already engaged with the issue. But really what you want to be doing, and that's where the impact campaign comes in, is spreading your message beyond the choir, getting outside of the people who are already engaged and care about this issue and want to do something about it. So raising awareness, educating, advocating, activating, and thinking about the campaign approaches and tactics that could help accomplish that, getting outside of the choir. And then also prioritizing what are your most important priorities and who do you need to influence, to create the change that you're seeking. I talked about mapping the issue area previously. I mean, that's just such a critical piece of campaign development. You will probably know a lot of the stakeholders in the space from making the film, but it's really important to understand what other campaigns and strategies are out there or being employed. What's working, what isn't, where are the gaps, what role can your project play in augmenting or amplifying or filling a gap? How does it fit into that broader ecosystem of the issue area? And that will then, start to inform who you will partner with and whose work you can help support with the film and the campaign. It's important to know your capacity and not overcommit. That's a real trap. Because we have finite resources, we have other projects as well that we want to create. So you've got to be really realistic about how deep and how long your team wants to keep working on the rollout of the impact strategy. Thinking about who your key spokespeople are going to be for screenings and media, how much access are you going to have to them, for how long are they going to be willing to travel with the film. How much funding do you need to support any film tours, speaker tours? How long will it take you to raise that? Making sure that you're hitting your fundraising goals at the right points to be able to then execute your strategy. And that will also help you be really clear with your partners and your funders about what you can and can't do, what you need and when. And it will also help you think about how big and ambitious and bold you want to be. And when I talk about being bold, it's really experimenting and taking risks and thinking outside the box. Like how can you create a big splash on an issue and help shift the discourse or the narrative in a way that's going to be impactful and also be useful to the movement and to organizations already working in that space. Having a clear call to action embedded in everything you do, it's a bit of a no-brainer. And then, of course, the measurement, evaluation, and sharing of the outcomes. So really, creating that evaluation framework as early as possible, and ensuring you're collecting both quantitative and qualitative data that is timely, that is useful, and that fits with the needs of your campaign and your stakeholders. In closing, there are really no templates for this work. There's a huge amount of resources and guidance and case studies out there. I really encourage you to go and explore the Impact Field Guide and and all of the other resources that link through from the Impact Field Guide. That's a Doc Society resource. We activists and organisers, community development workers, teachers, aid workers, everyone working in the social sector is constantly exploring how we make change and how do we create impact through our work. And by its very nature, the work kind of has to be unique to each film, and you ultimately learn by doing. So unfortunately, there isn't a roadmap, as it were, but there are these essential ingredients, and there are so many examples of well-documented case studies that show how filmmakers have achieved their goals. So for anyone who's embarking on this or already working in the space, it's a great space to work in. I get to do purpose-driven work every day. And, you know, I hope that you really embrace the opportunity that Good Pitch, you know, being in, you know, operational in New Zealand presents to the filmmaking community there, because it's just such a terrific initiative, and it's absolutely, you know, turbocharged our ability to do the work we do. I've definitely gone over time, but I'm just going to quickly share a last slide with some contact details. That's our website. Oh, sorry, going the wrong way. That's our website, and then there's a email address there if you'd like to reach out. That will land with my colleague Anna, and she will pass your message on to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. It's been great to listen to your journey and the journey of the film. It's very inspirational. And I think that there are some questions that will be forthcoming. The way we're going to be dealing with questions is that we're going to actually have a break now for 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back, and then we will then move on to talk to Alex Reed and Tamar, and we'll talk about the work on the Girl on the Bridge. And following that, we will have a conversation between all the panelists, and we will cover off the questions. So during this break, and any time at all, if a question pops up, can you please just go into the Q&A function in Zoom, type in your question, and we will be able to deal with it when we come back for the conversation dialogue piece later on. So in the meantime, once again, Anna, you are incredible, you are inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. It is so vast, so impactful, and I think there will be a lot of questions will come from that. So we'll take a 10-minute break now, and we'll play you a little video, and then we'll come back. So see you all very shortly. Welcome back, everyone. We're now going to the second part of our session, but before we start, just a couple of things. The 4 films that you just saw are films that are going to be featured at the Civic. Doc Edge will have a day in which we bring 4 films, and this is on the 22nd of November to Auckland. The Apollo, an Emmy Award-winning film that's never been seen, with the support of HBO. The Man on the Island is the world premiere of a brand new New Zealand film. The Painter and the Thief is a critically acclaimed award-winning film. As you can see, it's really interesting and controversial, the relationship between the painter and the thief, who stole her paintings. And the last trailer you saw is High Tide, No Hide. This is a sneak preview of a film that we have chosen for next year. A really important film, a very moving film, and I would suggest that if you have some time, come down to the Civic on the 22nd of November, watch 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of the films. We love to see you there. On a sadder note, I just wanted to pay homage to Bill Gosden. Bill Gosden, who's the director, was the director of the New Zealand International Film Festival. It's just been announced that he passed away. And so, you know, it's very sad when you see someone who is a hero, someone who's worked really hard to promote film in our country, and that, you know, we're in a situation where Bill has been suffering from ill health for quite some time, and, you know, he's now in a better place, but we're going to miss him. And I'd just like to thank Bill for all the hard work that he's done. When we finish, we'll give you some details about the 3rd workshop, which is on the 21st of November, and I hope that you'll be able to join us, because there will be an opportunity to work with some selected films in groups and be hands-on in terms of trying to be able to develop a impact campaign. Now, we're now moving to the part where we get to talk to the people behind the impact strategy of the Girl on the Bridge. Jazz Thornton is well known to most of you. She certainly has worked really hard to bring attention and advocacy to the area of suicide and suicide awareness. And I think that having the film The Girl on the Bridge has been able to enable much more in the way of impact to be delivered. The impact campaign has been delivered by the filmmakers, and I'd like to introduce again Alex Reid of Bloom Pictures. She's a creative producer working across documentary and drama on a diverse range of platforms. Back in the UK, Alex had the opportunity to work with Ken Loach for 5 years. I'm jealous. On a number of films, including Land and Freedom, My Name is Joe, and Bread and Roses, and since then has written research and produced over 20 factual and drama projects in New Zealand. In 2019, she produced the web series that Jazz pitched called Jessica's 3. And returning to the film, she co-produced Leanne Pooley's social impact film, The Girl on the Bridge. And she will soon also be releasing the upcoming genre-bending feature, There's No I in Threesome. Alex continues to develop innovative content under Bloom Pictures, including currently producing David Farrier's next feature documentary and a thriving drama slate with Emma Slade at Firefly Films. Tamar Munch is the owner of The Public Good. She's had more than 25 years experience as entertainment publicist, working in both New Zealand and Australia. She's worked at screen production companies, at television broadcasters, as well as independent film and theatre companies over that time. Her boutique publicity agency, The Public Good, specializes in media entertainment. And she brought her skill sets as a communication expert and publicist to the role of being the social impact producer for The Girl on the Bridge. So welcome, Alex and Tamar again.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much.
And without any further ado, once again, I'm just going to disappear off the screen and let you guys take over, and then we'll all come back and have a conversation afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you so much to Alex and to Dan and to Doc Edge for having us. We're also thinking about Bill Gosden a lot today, and we're really sad that he's passed, and thinking of him. So wanted to acknowledge that. Anna, thank you so much for that presentation. It was just deeply inspiring for us. So, and we've been furiously sort of, writing notes as well. So I think, as Alex said, I'm Alex Reid. I'm the producer of the film The Girl on the Bridge, and this is Tamar Munch, who is the social impact producer of the film. I think what's interesting about our film is that it was very much made not in a good pitch environment. We didn't have this, I guess, the support of good pitch. When we started the film, we knew that it was an impact film, but we didn't really know exactly what social impact was about. So we learned an enormous amount along the way. And so we thought the best way for us to tell you about our sort of social impact journey is to let you know what unfolded as we went. So that's the way we're going to do it. So our story is really about two projects, as Alex mentioned. The first one is Jessica's Tree, which is a web series that Jazz Thornton directed. And Jessica's Tree is a deeply personal insight about what it's like to be suicidal and what it's like to support someone who's suicidal. So it was Jazz's idea. She came up with it when she was 22, and it's very much a story that's made by a young person for a young audience. So I first found out about Jessica's Tree when I met Jazz. She rang me up. She just got into the Doc Edge pitching competition, and she rang me up because she was nervous, because she was a student still at South Seas, and she felt that everyone else might be more experienced than her. So we kind of had a chat, and then I went along to the pitch, and I was a bit nervous for her as well. But then she started talking, and she gave an incredibly honest account of her personal story, and shared a really powerful message. So Keith, if we could just play that little clip of Jazz.
Thank you for the opportunity to pitch. I am still in film school, Term 2. I'm pitching a web series about the suicide of my friend, Jess. I know that this is a hard subject and story to tell, but it's one that people my age want to talk about. You may have seen...
Originally, I was just going to tell Jess's story for film school. We had to do this kind of big project at the end of the year. And so when the opportunity came to pitch a series, I didn't really think I was going to get through or anything.
Some of you from New Zealand may have heard recently a story about a young girl who was on the South Motorway Bridge. The comments, if you go to the first slide, someone go and drag that mole back from the edge so traffic can get going. If she was serious, she would have done it by now. She just wants attention. Hopefully 50,000 volts worth is being arranged. The stigma around suicide and mental health is that you're attention seeking. The purpose of this is to change this stigma.
I was terrified, but I wanted to tell Jess's story because Jess was once that girl. Jess was once the girl standing on the motorway bridge.
And people want to see change. So my question is, will you help me make that change? Thank you.
And then I won the whole thing. After that, I was like, oh, we're doing this.
So I think what Jazz achieved in that room on that day was a really effective challenge to everyone there, sort of a group of older decision makers, to join with her in trying to kind of fight for better outcomes for people who have mental health issues or are suicidal. And she really had a massive impact. And that was the first time that we sort of saw impact in the project. So there was a good response in the room to Jazz's pitch, and she actually won it. And so after that, there was a lot of momentum, and Cass Avery and I came on board as producers of the web series. And that was the beginning of a 2-year journey of making that web series. We got funding from New Zealand On Air. We partnered with NZME, which was a really important partnership because they were already, they'd made a series called Breaking the Silence. And they had people there who were very passionate about making change as well in this area. So what we did over the next 2 years was navigate really carefully through really tricky terrain. And what became really apparent while we were doing it was, firstly, that Jazz was a really strong communicator. Obviously, she was deeply passionate about mental health in New Zealand, that she had a really strong lived experience story to tell, and she wanted to tell that story, but also that she had a really big network of people that she worked with, both in New Zealand and internationally. And so we sort of mapped that. You can see it, the infographic.
We should just say that the project was originally called the Silence Project, and this is from a prop, wasn't it?
That's right.
So
that's right.
I'm sorry, just to explain, it's not a completely different thing.
No,
the centre was
the centre. Yeah, of Jessica Street. And so once we knew all that, we just knew that we had to kind of harness that energy somehow. So we were busy making the web series. But we also, watching Jazz, we saw that her story, like the story of her, was also a really important story to tell. And it was at that stage that we started talking to Leanne Pooley, who's obviously a really experienced documentary maker. And she was very keen to come on board, and she started to make a feature documentary at the same time as we were making Jessica's Tree. So we sort of had a project within a project. And so for that 2 years, while Jazz was making the web series, Leanne was filming her, and she was making her feature documentary, which is The Girl on the Bridge, which is the story of a young mental health advocate who's fighting to change the stigma around suicide, to make change in our institutional systems, and to challenge all of us to try and do more. So I guess affecting change was at the centre of both projects from the very beginning. It was clearly what she was already doing with her charity Voices of Hope, and it was what the core team really wanted to do as well. But the key for us was really trying to work out what the impact was that we wanted to achieve. So we did start thinking about that quite early. But as the film started coming together in post-production, we also had to think about how on earth we were going to raise more money for a social impact campaign. So that became a big part of our thinking. So we knew that for the first bit, to be able to identify what we wanted to do with social impact, we needed to find a social impact producer that we could, in New Zealand, that we could use. And that was really tricky because really there weren't any. New Zealand is behind, is way behind Australia and way behind quite a few other countries in regards to social impact. So the idea was to find someone here who could kind of effectively be trained up through working on The Girl on the Bridge. And that is where tomorrow comes.
Thanks. Yes. So as Alex said in the intro, Alex said in the introduction, my background is as a publicist for film and TV, primarily film, TV, and the arts. And more recently, I have worked on quite a number of independent films, doing the publicity for them, and a couple of them have included sort of community screenings, a little bit of outreach aspect to them, which the filmmakers drove themselves, but certainly not a cohesive impact campaign. And I was looking after the publicity on those campaigns, with the filmmakers kind of driving the outreach aspect, but it didn't have the full kind of scope of an impact campaign. I think what was interesting, I came on board and kind of Googled what is social impact producing, to be honest. That's how, so you've got the full spectrum of Anna's experience versus the inexperienced in the room. I certainly couldn't be called an expert, but I think that to Anna's point, and she was talking about, what does an impact producer, or what do you need resource-wise and skill-wise for an impact producer? And I think that, I've come from that publicity background, and a primary aspect of that is defining the audience that you want to come to engage with the project, whether that's film, television, theatre, whatever, events, and segmenting that audience and working out how best to communicate with them, and also working out what it is that you want them to do. I mean, in the case of most film publicity, it's buy a ticket and turn up to the film, thanks. In the case of TV, it's, watch it on 3 at 7:30. It's relatively low, a low ask when you ask it, and that's, I guess, the difference from social impact work, is that what you're actually doing is a call to action to engage and implement some sort of change. But I do think that that's probably where the skill set intersects.
Yeah. The other thing also is that often at the point where you get, if you're not lucky enough to have a social impact producer on from the very beginning, and you get one a little later on in the process, having someone with great energy is really important, particularly if you're dealing with quite kind of rugged topics. So it was really important for us to have that injection of energy at the stage when Tamar came in, to kind of keep driving things forward.
Yeah, and I do think that, because the filmmakers are obviously, when I came on board was officially was sort of September 2019, so just over a year ago, and obviously at that point these guys had been with the project, both Jessica's Tree and The Girl on the Bridge, for what, 2 years?
2 years, yeah.
Already, before they'd even bloody launched the film. So yeah, and you sort of come and go, yeah, okay, we can do this, and they're all like, thank God. So we did one of the first things we did was we went and met with Rebecca Barry, who's a very experienced social impact producer based in Australia, and we basically sat with her and did a day-long workshop. It was really full on, wasn't it? Yeah. It was like your brain was dead by the end of it. But it was, you know, we had to kind of cram it into that time, because we'd obviously travelled over to see her when we could travel. And I think that that was a hugely useful experience for all of us. But it was really helpful for me just to understand the potential scope of the role, and also the pitfalls of going too big with your, you know, plan of action, and really trying to work out how to hone that plan. But I also think for these guys, one of the first things that we worked on was defining the artistic vision of the film and the impact vision of the film. And the film itself is about Jazz's story. She's a mental health advocate, and it's about her, you know, she's gone from somebody who has suffered from, you know, multiple suicide attempts, poor mental health, to being a mental health advocate, putting herself out on this pedestal, and the influx of communication that she gets from people, young people in the world, and she's kind of a lone voice in that. And so one of the things that we did on that day was define the fact that, you know, the impact, the grand impact goal of the film is obviously to reduce suicide numbers in New Zealand, full stop. That's a big thing. But, you know, that's Jazz's goal as well. And I think that what we kind of got to was that the impact vision for the film was about allowing people to feel comfortable talking about mental health, talking about suicide, because a huge part of the film is, as you saw in the clip, even the pitch clip that Jazz put, that we just played, Jazz's experience is one of a lot of judgment, a lot of negativity, so that when people actually say, hey, look, I'm struggling, a lot of the time their friends, their family, their colleagues don't know what to say. And there's that sort of shutdown, as opposed to, because nobody actually knows. We aren't, if you're not a psychologist and you're not a mental health professional, you're not professionally working in that space, we don't know how to act. And certainly, you know, in a way, coming from showbiz, publicity, I have no professional experience in mental health. So I was kind of acting from that point of view of, okay, if you're a know-nothing person, what do you need to know? And so Rebecca really, so that was one thing that we worked on, was that impact vision for the film, and what the outcomes were. And we sort of looked at it with the lens of community impact, corporate impact, educational impact, and political impact, and sort of lots of discussion about where the film intersected with those different segments of society. And we came very quickly to the idea that community and corporate were the two areas that we really wanted to focus on, in that was kind of where we could hit that ordinary people, you know, just your ordinary Kiwi, your ordinary person in the street who doesn't know how to respond to somebody who's struggling, who doesn't know what it is to be somebody who's struggling. And that if we could affect some discussion and amongst those groups, that actually is the first way to actually implement some change in terms of just, it's kind of unlocking the conversation around mental health and suicide, really. The other things that we covered off with Rebecca, obviously, at that workshop, were things like the importance of partnerships, and also, as Anna said, the importance of defining and measuring success. We did find that it's a film about suicide, and that's a completely different proposition. You know, it's such a hot topic in terms of the sensitivities around it, way more than many other issues, social issues, I think.
Yeah, and one thing we had to think about, obviously, a lot, was that while we really knew that the people who we wanted to watch the film was that the audience that Tamar was talking about, who are the people who are really concerned about suicide but don't quite know what to do, which I think is many of us. we also, of course, always had to remember that many people who are struggling, and particularly given the film is about Jazz, who is young, many young people who are struggling will watch the film. So that was something we had to think about really carefully in regards to, when we were making the film, but also when we were designing the social impact campaign. That was a really interesting balance that we walked all the way through.
And actually, sorry to interrupt, we're terrible, we're going to start interrupting each other. But that was also why education, I should say, so there were those 4 pillars, I guess: community, corporate, educational, political, and education seems like an obvious one for a film about mental health, but actually in the discussions with the filmmakers, what we established was that actually Jessica's Tree as a project is better suited to being played in schools, and it's much more accessible to younger viewers because it's the story of a teenager, and it's Jazz's story of the teenager, and The Girl on the Bridge was much more really targeted at the parents of those kids. And so education in that traditional sense of sending the film out with to schools for screenings and things, that got stripped away quite early because it was a Jessica's Tree.
Yeah,
it was better off with Jessica's Tree to do that. So that's kind of a long-term plan, isn't it?
Yeah, that might be the next. That might be
we
the
can
next
talk about
phase.
that later.
Yes, that's right.
So following that workshop with Rebecca, we then I put together a proposal for the film commission, which was, and this is all again in lieu of other funding structures. We went to the NZFC for the innovation grant. The innovation grant for the film commission's innovation grant is a distribution grant, in essence, that is about attracting new audiences to New Zealand films, and so non-traditional audiences, or audiences that sit outside of that wouldn't normally go to the cinema, etc. I wouldn't say that they're just going to be doling out innovation grants for social impact campaigns, to be honest, because there's a whole structure around that, and I'm sure the NZFC can talk to that. But in our instance, getting people to go along and pay their $15 to see a film about suicide, there's a barrier there immediately. And so part of our pitch around the innovation grant was that it's actually just about getting the film in front of audiences. So this is just a snapshot of the content of that prop that we sent to the film commission, but that was basically our next step, was to get that grant, and that was specifically to create some materials. So we really ring-fenced what that grant was for what we were applying for that funding. It's a limited pool. They have a very small cap on it.
But it did work for us in terms of the idea of getting an audience. I mean, the other thing, I guess, about the film is that it became apparent really quickly that it was important to offer quite a few different viewing experiences because of the sensitivities around the film. For some people, it's better to watch it in a group, and other people feel more comfortable with watching it at home on their own. So we always kind of had the idea that it was important to have, obviously, a theatrical release, but also ensuring that it was very quickly available online at the same time as well. So that sort of fitted with that innovation grant idea. Yeah, and what I should probably just rewind as well a little bit, just to talk a bit about what Cass and I did to raise money for the social impact campaign. So obviously the film was funded by the Film Commission, but we also had managed to raise quite a good amount of philanthropic funding and private investment for the film. But we got to post-production and then sort of had growing anxiety about the fact that we knew by this stage what we wanted to do, but we didn't have any money. So I guess what we did, I mean, the advantages we had was, of course, Jazz and the sort of power of her communication. Also Jessica's Tree, which by the stage, which was by the stage was released and had been really well received, and was particularly well received within the mental health community. So that was really fantastic. Also, of course, the other advantage we had was that suicide is, or the issues that we have with suicide in New Zealand and internationally is really well known. So it was a really well known issue, and it's an issue that many people want to do something about, and many people don't know what to do. So that kind of helped us when we were trying to raise more money for the social impact campaign, because donating money or supporting in that way is one way that you can help change the suicide statistics. So that was an advantage for us. But really, what we did is we just created a whole lot of different pitch documents, and we just rang every mental health organisation we knew, every investor that we'd already had contact with, every philanthropist that we could think of, and just kind of went all out trying to get support. And by this stage, our trailer was about ready, so that became a really important kind of part of what we could show. So perhaps if we show the trailer now. Thank you, Keith.
In the last 8 days, I have received 6 goodbye messages from people. I have literally had to restrain someone who was trying to take their life. I have been on the phone to someone else who was about to take their life. It has been one heck of a week.
Our epidemic that we call suicide is no longer something that we can survive through, but we must learn how to fight.
Our generation is sitting here like, we're the ones that are dying, and therefore we have to be the ones that will stand up and solve it because no one else is going to.
My name's Jazz.
I was once the person on the other side. I was once the person wanting to jump off the bridge, planning how I was going to die. You're consumed by that 24/7.
Because young people identify with her, they contact her constantly. There's not a single thing in my life that is not to do with suicide.
You've got people talking to you every single day, not wanting to be here anymore.
Yeah. It's weird how normal that is to me now. We're all the sum of different lives. The reasons why people get to this place isn't a simple equation.
You just got really overwhelmed with it all. I'm terrified of waking up the next day to someone's suicide message and...
Can't be the world counsellor.
The thing is, I was so careful not to give anyone enough information about me that they would know how broken I really was.
So many lines.
She feels all these things and you can't explain it, you don't...
This won't be easy.
And it's human to turn away from pain. I am so angry. Why is it easier to get pizza delivered to your house than it is to access a crisis worker when you're about to kill yourself?
This is the problem. No one knows what to do to help.
I just want to give my daughter a hug. She's found a purpose for all that journey that she's been on. Man, that's going to take a lot of courage.
They're your friends, they're your family, they're your work colleagues, they're your neighbours. It's time that we become a society where people actually feel like they can ask for help.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, showing the trailer really was really beneficial for us in terms of beginning to find support, and it was slow going, but we started to kind of get enough supporters on board, and particularly people who really related to, I guess, the hope aspect of the film, and particularly the emphasis on Jazz as an advocate. So it was sort of a film about advocacy and action. And so then we got at least to a point where we knew that we could keep Tamar on and just keep going. So I mean, it's been in chunks of funding, but that's how we've got there. So another thing that's really important to talk about that I know Anna talked about as well is the partnerships that we formed. So from early on, we worked a lot with 1737, which is a government organisation and a helpline, particularly for people who are suicidal. So we worked with them from the beginning. They were in the film, and they worked with Jazz a lot. So they were really helpful. But we also touch base with a lot of other organisations, including Mentor, which is John Kerwin is involved, and they're very involved in the corporate space. So we spent.
And Voices of Hope, this one here, is Jazz's charity organisation.
Which was the starting point, really.
Yeah,
that's right. So so we put a lot of time, of course, into making those partnerships. We did a lot of screenings, held a lot of discussions with the organisations. And I would say that we were really happy with the amount of support that we got. It is also a challenging subject matter, and this is a hugely sort of under-resourced sector. And we were showing the film, it's kind of earlier this year, in the lead up to the election, in the middle of COVID. So, we were like really thrilled with the level of support we got, but we didn't get support from everyone. And that was part of, I think, a learning that we had. We were so determined to do it absolutely right, and we wanted everyone to come on board and support us. And that's not realistic. And that's kind of what we learned, as we went, that as long as that we had, we had shown the film to everyone that we needed to show the film to, and we had listened. And it was a really big learning for us that we had the key people on board.
And actually, it's one of the issues that that this sector faces, is that there isn't a consensus around how to deal with suicides, and so there's sort of, it's, I guess, unlike climate change or other issues, there's some quite clear paths that people can take, and that are sort of agreed paths as well. I mean, I'm sure that there's contention as well, but there's just something around suicide and mental health where there's quite a bit of still quite a bit of antagonism between organisations. They're competing for a very limited pool of funding, all of those sorts of things, and so that was quite an interesting experience.
And also, I mean, as you saw in the trailer, there's actually only at one point, but at one stage, Jazz does criticise the system. And not everyone was comfortable with that, but that was a really important and honest moment that had to be in the film. So, lots of robust conversations, and ultimately we had a really good outcome. But it was a big part of our process, was working through that. The other thing that was really fantastic was, of course, we were also looking at international partnerships, and that is an ongoing thing. We're about to go much more international now, so you kind of got us still in the middle of our campaign. But something that was really wonderful was that the World Health Organization came on board early and gave us a really fabulous endorsement, and also screened the film, sort of did a big screening of it, and then went on to screen it for all their staff. Again, this was right in the middle of COVID, so they did it sort of all online, and so that was a really lovely confidence boost for us.
And they had Jazz doing a live Facebook Live on the Who Facebook page, and that played the trailer within that. And so there was sort of that happened really around our release, and that was a great piece of advocacy from And so, talking about the release, the way that we decided to release the film was we had a premiere at the New Zealand International Film Festival, and we went with that plan because we always knew that there were two dates that were really, really important to us, which was Mental Health Awareness Week and the World Suicide Prevention Day, and the New Zealand Festival was reasonably close to those dates. So our plan was to premiere it at the festival, and then to kind of roll it out more to communities, etc., on the back of that, on those really important mental health dates. So that was so that partnership was also obviously important to us. We should say, I don't think we said this as before, but also you self-distributed.
Oh, yes. So this is another thing that happens. So we obviously put in place a plan, like a plan for the film, a plan for distribution, a plan for social impact campaign, and then things happen. And of course, this year COVID happened, so we had to adjust, like everyone has. And so we initially did have a distributor on board, and then because of COVID-related issues, we ended up self-distributing. In the end, I think that was the best way for us to go, because we had raised that money for social impact campaign, and we had a campaign in place, and because we knew that that as this is a film about suicide, just doing a theatrical release was never going to be the right way to release this film. So we always knew that we would release it. We would do a modest release into cinemas, but then we would also do our corporate screenings, our community screenings, and then we would also release it online.
So I will just flick to you. So one of the key pieces of work that I did was, I'm just going to call this up, was really around the assets that we put together for our community and corporate screening hosts. This is just the kit that we put together for the community and charity groups, and then there was another one with a lot of similar content, but another one which was for workplaces. And they, as I said, they were the two types of organisations that we targeted for outreach to host their own screenings. Now, initially, of course, that was going to be around cinema screenings, and then hello COVID, and so we can talk a little bit about some of the work that we did around shifting that to online. That was relatively nimble, relatively nimble. Well, we were nimble. So this is just our toolkit. Now, I mean, there's 1,000 examples of toolkits out there. And I basically, as I say, this was the first time I'd done anything of this nature, and I'm certainly not by no means a mental health expert. I will post these links actually into the chat. That might be a useful way to go, just so people can explore them themselves. But basically, one of the interesting things I think with putting the toolkit together is that it's actually very similar to putting something like publicity materials together, like your press kit and your EPK and all that sort of stuff. So it felt quite familiar to me in that it's, I've made probably 1,000 press kits in my life. So this one though had the added caveat of the fact that it dealt with the issue of mental health. And so I'm just going to pull down to, so this is, you're dealing with a topic that, and our whole purpose, the whole kaupapa of the film is around getting people comfortable talking about mental health and suicide. And so we wanted our screening hosts to feel comfortable to do that. And so I worked very closely with a clinical psychologist that just oversaw all of these materials and gave us feedback and all of that kind of thing. Obviously, we point to lots of other mental health issues. We put together some promotional resources for our hosts. Put some discussion questions together, which obviously that's where we talk to our counsellor. And then our case studies are based off the content of the film. So we've used clips from the film, clips from and quotes from the film, and then discussion questions and conversation starters around each of those. So that was one of the key things. There's also the website, so people, this is basically a one-stop shop for people who are interested in the film to click into and to find out all about it, basically. Things like the pricing structure that we put together for these, there's lots of different costing examples for social impact films. I've researched heaps, and there's, it goes from like, hello, we're free, to $1,000 for a screening. So, I mean, we just kind of ended up working out what the purpose of the screenings were and what we needed to charge in order to make that stuff work. Obviously the audience guidelines, spreading the word, etc., fundraising ideas, all that sort of thing. So that website is a big resource. I think that actually maybe we'll get Keith, can you share that? So one of the other things, I'll just speak to this, one of the other things that we did was a collection of videos separate to the film. The two messages of the film, one is about how people can find help themselves and how people can give help. So these videos on each of these pages within the site, the how to find help is from people that are experts in this field, whether it's police, whether it's helpline, psychologists, GPs, school teachers, etc.
And what we did, sorry to say, is that we went out, Cass and I interviewed everybody, and we went out, and quite a few of them are people who appeared either in the film or in the web series. So yeah, so they, and also just going from what Tamara was saying, is that and a really important part of putting these interviews on the site was to balance out that criticism of the system, so that you know, people had seen the film. If they then really felt like they needed to seek help, either for their, you know, a loved one or for themselves, they could go to the website, and there was really clear sort of resource in regards to sort of what you could do to get help.
Yeah. And actually it's also that this content is all available for free. And so if people can't access the film, then they also have a bunch of free assets that support the message of the film around finding help and giving help. So these ones are from people with lived experience of living with family or friends with mental health issues, or they are suicide bereaved themselves.
If we go back to the other one, if we can get maybe Keith, could you play the Mel interview? So Mel is from 1737.
So 1737 is a mental health and addictions helpline service. It is a text and call service, so you can text or call 1737 about anything really. It could be about something that you're experiencing yourself, or it could be that you're concerned about someone in your life and you're wanting to get some advice on how to support them or how to get support for them. It's a government funded service which is part of the National Telehealth Service.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, so that website really, you know, as Alex said, we weren't, I should also say my role wasn't a full-time role. And so putting the website together, putting the toolkits together, putting the video assets together, between all of us, that was probably, you know, we were all working towards like being one full-time person, I guess, in a way.
No, that's right. And I mean, another thing that is that we definitely need to acknowledge is that so Cass Avery, who's the other producer, works at Augusto, and so the film was a co-production between Augusto and Bloom, which is me, and Augusto has got an amazing amount of resource when it comes to sort of the visuals that you see on the website, and in the toolkits, and you know, all of the sort of, I suppose, the branding of the social impact campaign. We didn't have a great deal of money, but because they had the resource, that was crucial for us. It really helped in terms of, you know, making, you know, being able to kind of spread the message in the best way. And so, and just talking a little bit more about the website. So it clearly became kind of our hub because it had all that extra material, and we realized that actually that's a really optimal way for people, for some people, to watch the film, is to watch it online from that website, because all that other support material is there. There's links to Jessica's tree, and it feels sort of safe. So what we decided was that at the stage when we decided to self-distribute, what we decided to also do was to work with Shift 72, who, for those of you who don't know, an organisation in Hamilton who are madly busy now, because they do all of the back end of the websites for international film festivals, local film festivals. I think they do Doc Edge, and they do the NZIFF one, and many others around the world. So we
so that's for the video on demand. Basically, post-COVID, they are now the go-to.
Yeah,
all video on demand.
Yeah,
they're based in Hamilton and they're crazy busy.
Yes, so we partnered with them. Cass and I sort of met with them, and so they built the back end, which meant that people could buy the film directly from the website. And initially we did that just in New Zealand, and then we decided to open it up. And so it's now international except for Australia, which has a separate distributor. So and that was a lot of work, and because new knowledge work, because it was quite techy, but it's been really fantastic as a way for people to view the film, but also really fantastic because of the reporting that you get. So we have really clear data about who's watching the film where, and also the response to maybe a post that Jazz does or some sort of activity that we do.
The publicity nerd in me absolutely loves it, because literally Jazz will do an Instagram post and we see the spike in views.
Yeah,
it's very
satisfying.
Yeah, it's very satisfying.
It's very satisfying. So so that has been an interesting part of our sort of process.
Yeah. And then I didn't work alone, so I was obviously producing those materials, the all of that stuff, and then alongside me was the amazing Rachel Judkins, who is a researcher by trade, documentary researcher by trade, and she was brought on sort of a bit after I was, but quite early on in the piece, and she did an incredible piece of research into who are the workplaces that we're going to target for our outreach, who are the community groups and churches, etc., etc., etc. And she built just this incredible database of contacts and literally legwork on the phone, because you can look up websites, and that's actually something I'd really say that she was incredible at doing. You can look at a website and get a phone, get an email, but you don't necessarily get the email of that person that you need to contact. And a lot of it is very much getting on the phone, tapping into a personal conversation, especially around this kind of subject matter. And the other part that I think, I'm realizing that we're going to go over time, but the other part of that aspect was that having the clinical psychologist having endorsed or having overseen the production of the content, the the screening toolkit, the video assets, all of those things, it was really important to a lot of those people that Rachel was having those discussions with. They were like, well, where's this come from and who's okayed it? And we could actually, back up our work, that it wasn't just kind of invented by me. It wasn't just some publicity material. It was genuinely, quite a clinically endorsed resource. And so, we had those databases that Rachel put together. This is just in terms of how we got the message out around the social impact campaign, was direct outreach using Jazz and her network, which obviously Alex showed that infographic at the start, just in terms of her reach. A social media campaign, so I'll just flick you to this is just one of the pieces of content that we created. So we used quotes from the film, created little tiles that were shared on Instagram, on Facebook, and in that kind of meme sense, but certainly Jazz and her cohort of followers online are very much about this advocacy space and really sharing these kinds of messages. So we knew that this stuff would resonate with them. And it was very much about what are the messages of hope? What are the messages of things that are constructive and that work in this space? How do we build empathy? How do we build comfortability around talking about this subject matter? And then the other aspect in terms of working or just getting that message out was, as Alex said, the premiere of the film was around the New Zealand International Film Festival. And so we leveraged some of that publicity and also then the publicity around the release which coincided with Mental Health Awareness Week in New Zealand. And we used those publicity opportunities that Jazz and Leanne were doing to explain that people could host screenings of the film. And I should just add, so they could host screenings of the film in cinema or at their workplace or community hall or whatever, or they could purchase a group screening online. So there was a voucher system basically where people could, you know, purchase 20 screenings of the film and share those screenings out, and share a promo code basically to their group to watch the film. And then whether they chose to come together to have a discussion about it, or whether they chose to to have a virtual discussion in this format about it, that was up to them. But we gave them different ways to hold those group screenings, and that was basically a COVID. It was like a COVID response. It was like, oh God, how do we do group screenings in a post-COVID world? Yeah. But it worked really well, and the Shift 72 functionality worked for that. So
yeah. So I mean, I guess in wrapping, maybe some key learnings from us, or I guess some challenges. Of course, COVID has been a challenge, but I think that I'm really proud of the way we've adjusted, and I think we've having those many different ways of viewing has been essential to allow people to find the film and to watch it in the way that they feel most comfortable with. Obviously, we hadn't necessarily planned to self-distribute, and that's what we ended up doing in the end.
And it's hard work.
Yeah.
The physical interaction of theatre, dealing with the exhibitors and stuff, it's not to be taken lightly.
No, that's right. And I think that's another important thing to remember, is that if you have a central figure, so for us it's Jazz, it's making sure that they're not too fatigued as well. That's been a really important part of the job all the way through, really. But that is something that we have to constantly kind of keep an eye on, particularly with the subject matter, but actually in general. So keeping that momentum up as a team, and also really looking after everyone on the team. I would like to add as well, we were lucky that the Film Commission gave us some extra money to help us with looking after people who appeared in the film and people who worked on it. So that was really fantastic, and we're deeply grateful to them for that. So and the other thing is, as we said at the beginning, is that we kind of had a plan, and then we've had to adjust as we've gone along. But
a lot.
Yeah. But it's and we're ongoing. So where we're at is that we're now so Australia has just kind of launched, and we're now looking at other territories, thinking about education, which is obviously a big part. Potentially, but we also go into that a little nervously because of the subject matter. So we've got a lot of, thinking to do around that.
And I'll just show you that. So this is, obviously we've had a bunch of workplace screenings and community group screenings and things like that. So this is just a few pieces of feedback from some of our hosts. And we got them to give us this again, this was something that we got them to give us their feedback so that we could then turn it into social media assets or put these quotes in other of our outreach materials. So we've obviously got like a big MailChimp database that we send out stuff. So, and it just meant that we were using examples from some of these hosts to kind of encourage other potential hosts to come on board. And ISMIS is a workplace, so they did an on-site screening. University of Otago Students Association did a screening in the auditorium. That was just the Students Association took it upon themselves to do that. And Rush Digital was another place. And I feel like, I'm not sure, actually I can't remember which one was ISMIS or Rush, but they sort of did a hybrid version of workplace and online for their team. So you could either, obviously because of COVID, not everybody was working in the workplace, or there were number limits, so they could offer their other team members the opportunity to watch it online. But yeah, so it's as Alex said, it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah. So for example, in the week after next, Leanne and I are doing a screening to I think it's 80 clinicians from Middlemore Hospital. So yeah, and that's another big thing, is that it's such a it's a really satisfying process, and it's wonderful. It's a long road. It's also a long road, and yeah, so really, really great to get additional expertise on to kind of help you along the way. That's us. That's us. Yeah.
Hey, thanks very much. Again, another wonderful discussion. You two have done incredible things with the film. So, on behalf of New Zealand, and also, those of us who are really concerned about mental health, thank you so much for the work that you've done. I'd like to bring Anna back as well, so that we can now have a conversation with everyone. I thought maybe one of the starting points I'd really like to perhaps get your feedback, your combined feedback. So we'll use this kind of like a dialogue between friends. When should an impact strategy begin, or when should you be appointing an impact producer in an optimum situation? So when someone's starting out a film right now, and there will be a lot of people that will be watching right now thinking to themselves, I'm going to do this film, I need to have an impact strategy, but the question is going to be when.
I think Anna should answer that, because I feel like we didn't do it in the optimum way. So.
I've done it in lots of different ways. I mean, look, I started impact producing before the term even existed. I mean, it was just part and parcel of producing, and essentially as the producer, you were sort of left holding the baby and desperately trying to find your audience and keep engaging, and bringing partners in and raising whatever money you could to sort of sustain that work. But here in Australia, the Documentary Australia Foundation, which is a bridge between philanthropy and documentary filmmaking, has been a huge game changer, as has, the Good Pitch juggernaut. So it's given us the luxury of being able to come on, bring impact producers on earlier. But even with that Sugar film, I mean, I came on board after Good Pitch with the team. We're in final stages of post. They raised the budget to employ me at Good Pitch. That was kind of, anxiety inducing watching them pitch to give me a job, but they got there. And so it was very much a bolt on, really just trying. We had 2 months to get that campaign ready before the film was released. So we did a lot of work in phases well after the theatrical release. With 2040, it was a completely different experience because of, the film being in such early development and the tremendous support we were able to attract through Good Pitch. It meant that, and me being a producer on the film as well as wearing the impact producer hat, it just meant that we were building the campaign throughout development, throughout production, and it just meant we came out of the starting gates ready to go with everything ready.
And for clarity, I think that would be so amazing.
It's an incredible privilege to be able to do that, and it's rare. But certainly it's much more effective if you are if someone is looking at everything through that lens the whole way through the film journey as well.
So Tamar, I know that you came on a little bit later. Now, if you had come on at the very beginning, how would you have changed your journey, or would your journey have changed? What would have made things easier for you by being
I think the interesting thing for me was probably not a lot, and part of the reason I say that is because the publicity team that these guys got on were a group that I know and love very well, and so that aspect was kind of handled, I guess, in a way that I would have probably handled it. I think probably the only thing that coming on earlier, I felt at times a little bit like a conductor of the audience, the publicity, the social media, the production, the distribution, I was kind of, and I think to Anna's point, it was kind of trying to see the voice through that lens of how's the impact going to happen at all of these beats. And I think maybe being on board a little bit earlier might have just changed things like social media. I probably would have started the social media part of the film's presence sooner. because that basically launched at the time that the film launched, pretty much. And I always, that's me coming from a publicity background, that I think that it serves you well to start building your audience for social media, you know, on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you are, and just databases, just building your audience from the minute that you know the bloody thing's happening. When I used to work at a production company in-house as a publicist, I would literally go and get, the minute that a title was at any stage of like midway through development, I'd get the website, the Facebook page, the Instagram handle, the Twitter page, the whatever there was, Snapchat, when Snapchat was called, whatever was going, I'd just bags all the handles and not even necessarily post, but start posting the minute that the thing was funded or greenlit or whatever, so that you can start to build who the hell you're engaging with. And it just allows you to build your audience over a much greater period of time, which I think, so that's probably the key thing.
And I think when you don't have, you know, a lot of, I mean, we raised a reasonable amount of money, but it was pretty shoestring, really. And I think what we've achieved is really fantastic for what we had. But I mean, if we could have had more people on the social impact team, that would have been incredible. And also building building the website took, I cannot tell you how much time that took of my and Cass's time to build that kind of website and the add-on and all of that kind of stuff. We just sort of were doing as we went. Like, it was very kind of guerrilla style, really. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that we learned along the way was that for Rachel, who I mentioned before, who did all that research into the databases and all of the outreach with the people that were on the databases, she literally kind of became a one-woman call center, like a one-woman salesperson. And she's a researcher, she's not a salesperson. And actually, I think now that one of the things that I would almost be looking at, depending on the nature of the campaign, obviously, is to get somebody who has a skill base in sales, because it's different to publicity and it's different to research, and it's quite like, it's literally, you know, you're a salesperson. That's quite
I might just jump in. Our screenings coordinator for 2040 has a sales background. She actually worked in a luxury car hire place where she was trying to get, you know, coerce people into hiring Ferraris for their, you know, their dirty weekend away and things like that. And she's just so brilliant at dealing with all the idiosyncrasies of every request, and everyone's trying to wrangle for a discount, and she's just so calm and collected, and she handles it with wit and, you know, a great energy, and
it's kind of not being disheartened by a no as well, and repitching it and rescoping how you might actually get them on board. Whereas I think as a publicist and even as a researcher, like you don't just take the first no, you do try again, but you're not necessarily, like, you know, publicity often I don't have any money to offer them. So if a journalist turns me down for a story, I kind of have to go, you know, they'll go, oh, sorry, we don't have space, we don't have a journalist, we don't have this, we're doing something else, whatever. I kind of have to roll with it. Whereas if you're a salesperson, it's a slightly different mindset and skill set. Yeah.
I was just going to go back to distribution, because I know you self-distributed with The Girl on the Bridge, and I know you've been working with Mad Men in-house as well as with them on the films. Now, I'm curious because there is an uneasy tension there, isn't there? Because social impact values, commercial, you know, aspirations, they don't sometimes necessarily gel together. Now, I'm just, from your point of view, Anna, if you are now advising someone who's going to be approaching a distributor with the intention that they want to get a distributor to come on board, how would you pitch a film or a social impact film so that it doesn't seem to detract away from the commercial appealability or the box office revenue of a film?
Well, it's very much showing how you're going to help bring new audiences to the film that the traditional marketing campaign probably wouldn't even be, you know, thinking about, because they're too hard to reach. So it's that really strategic, you know, kind of mapping of target audiences, and then partnering with the right people and developing the right messages and assets and, you know, everything that is so tailored to that particular target audience. Distributors, you know, they just don't have time or, budgets to be doing that kind of, really targeted outreach. So they, Mad Mad see it as incredibly valuable because they've been involved in a number of good pitch films and other impact films where they've seen the commercial outcomes as well. And certainly, I started off at Madman solely working on that sugar film. And when, people in the business started to see some really interesting revenue, spikes and a longer tail with the revenue off the film, they got very interested in what I was doing. And that led to the in-house role and to me working on titles like The Hunting Ground, which was a US feature doc that Madman had acquired. And we actually designed a bespoke release for that film. Didn't even get a theatrical because we took it as a film about sexual violence within university communities. We took it straight to unis, and we ran a very bespoke screening program for that film, but that still generated significant screening fees, well above what it would have generated if they'd gone the theatrical path with that film.
And I think that's one of the other things that you just mentioned with Hunting Ground, because it was about sexual violence on campus. And it is a difficult topic, and I know that suicide is a difficult topic. And sometimes you're thinking to yourself, how do I market, how do I promote a topic that's not exactly kind of sexy? It's kind of like difficult for people to watch. I mean, the social impact films tend to be that. They tend to be difficult topics. We love social impact films because we're passionate about the world and about the changes that we're seeing in the world that we're trying to either help to influence away from or help to influence towards. I mean, from your points of view, I'd love to hear more about what you might, how you view marketing difficult topics or marketing difficult subjects.
I think a lot of it's to do with the approach to the film, the approach the film takes. And certainly, when I get involved with films that are difficult topics, there has to be that kind of empowerment piece to the story. And in The Hunting Ground, there was a very strong student survivor activist story. And those young women, were incredibly inspiring. And, the campaign was very much attached to the organization they had set up and rep on campus in the US. And in fact, then there was an Australian arm of that organization set up here in Australia, and we worked really closely with them. So, that film didn't go to theatrical, and to be honest, I think that would have been a really tough sell in Australia because the response to it was, and certainly we got this response when we did our early stakeholder screenings with, university administrators, vice chancellors, student support services. Everyone had the same reaction. That's an American film. That's American culture. That doesn't happen here. Then when you actually speak to students and staff in frontline, student support roles like counselling and, residential advisors, they're like, of course it happens here. And exactly the same story plays out in that the survivors are blamed and vilified and the perpetrators are protected because it protects the brand of the institution. So it was I think that it being an American film probably would have inhibited its ability to engage a theatrical audience, a ticket-paying cinema audience. Obviously, there are strategic, kind of partnerships and groups you can tap into, but that wouldn't, I don't think, have, warranted the outlay, the P&A outlay to do a theatrical. And in fact, because the impact goals were about having those conversations within the university communities and also collecting data here, so running a national survey of prevalence within Australian universities was around, about actually dispelling that myth that it doesn't happen here, and then developing a best practice framework as well. So it was very deep work done with those specific communities.
And quite similar for us as well. We really thought carefully about the theatrical release for The Girl on the Bridge and knew that it would be a modest release. Tone is everything, isn't it? And we talked a lot about the best way to promote the film, about the emphasis on on hope, on the emphasis on what people can do after they've watched the film, the safety around it.
And it was also that thing that Jazz is really, she's a leader in this space. She's a mental health advocate, but she's just a normal person. She's not a health work, she's not an expert. And so it was very much taking that, I don't know, there's an Israeli army general that did there's a leadership thing, which is the follow me. Like the best leaders are the ones that go into battle first with their troops. And so it was kind of using her as that role model to lead people through the process and to bring them along with her. And so it was more about how can you, not just a film about suicide, but how can you develop empathy, learn how to be a better person. And that stuff's not necessarily specifically, like it's touched on in the film, but that's what the impact campaign is about.
Much more focused on.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. And I think that part of the frustrations that a lot of people had in the old days where we didn't have so much discussion about impact, they said, we'll watch a film, we'll get really upset, or we'll get really angry or inspired, but then we don't know what to do. So we just go home. And these days, there's more engagement because filmmakers are working closely with the subjects and thinking about how do you provide some objectives, or as your personal action planner that you had for 2040, how do you present something that people can take away and they can actually do something about it? Because that's what we all want to do, because we watch documentaries because we want to find out about the world. We want to fight all the bad things that are happening in the world because we want to fight about the world, fight for the world. And so, this is what social impact is really important. I'm really heartened by the fact that I was just listening to you guys talk about wellness and health, because it's really, really important that the people involved in the actual campaigns themselves and the films are looked after as well. Because someone like Jazz, as we all know, she suffered a lot in terms of people thinking that she was making this film just to become famous, just to become a celebrity, when all she really wanted to do was to bring awareness to the issue and to help people through it. And it's really important that our subjects and our filmmakers and the impact producers are all looked after as well, because it takes a toll on it's personal.
Yeah, it's such an important, it's such a big part of the job, I think, is making sure that everyone feels cared for, and that the momentum that is necessary doesn't take over the need to check on everyone's welfare, because there is a tension there. I think as a producer, there is a tension there, because you need to get the film made, and but you have to always balance that with,
and I think the other thing to point out is that care of the team. Obviously, there's a huge duty of care to your contributors and your spokespeople, but vicarious trauma is a real thing. And certainly spending 2 years in deep in sexual violence, that was a really tough space to be working in. I was very fortunate that I was part of a very supportive team of the three of us, really working very closely together, and we really supported each other. But it's a really important issue, that burnout, and that just when you are constantly in that space of looking at really confronting information and hearing really confronting, devastating stories, it does take its toll. And
definitely, And I would actually add something that was really good for us was Cass and I having two producers across the web series and then the film has been completely essential in terms of kind of leaning on each other.
It would have been impossible with one person.
Actually, it was logistically, but also just emotionally. That's been really good.
That's another top tip that I miss, is like, choose carefully who you're going to work with, because these are long-term relationships. I mean, Damon and I, we speak to each other more regularly than we do our partners, and that's been the last 6 years. So you've really got to, like each other, respect each other, and support each other, and be willing to go, you know what, you're burnt out, you have a rest, I'll do the heavy lifting, and really spread the load as much as you can.
And I would say, for what I do think as well, a really important message for producers in general is you have to look after yourself as well as looking after everyone else, because I think often that doesn't happen, because we were trying to drive everything forward, and I just think it's so important talking about that.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I totally agree. I think that producers need to make sure they look after themselves as much as they're looking after their own crew and cast, because that's really important. Two quick questions before we sign off, because we're running a bit late. The first is that would you present a budget in the overall film budget for an impact campaign, or does it sit separately? So a lot of people have asked the questions always is that you're developing a film budget, should you have a line for impact and cover that off in your main budget, or should you have a separate budget? Because sometimes impact campaigns or the thought about impact campaigns come late. So what's the optimum way of doing that? And the second thing that I would like to ask, and that follows a little bit onto this, is that if you had something that you could ask Screen Australia or New Zealand Film Commission in terms of the work that you do, what would it be? I mean, what would it be to help impact producers and make sure that Australia and New Zealand continues to make really important social impact films that make a difference?
I might jump in on the budget, the first question. Sorry, I've got a bit of a feedback. If you wouldn't mind muting Alex and Tamara, that'd be helpful. Thanks. So I can't hear properly. So on the budget, I mean, traditionally we've had separate impact budgets because, you know, impact producing wasn't really accepted as something that would sit as a line item or a number of line items in the budget. That's shifted over the last 10 years here. Well, particularly the last 5 years. Screen Australia, you know, have really recognised the role that Good Pitch and you know, the advent of social impact producing has had on, you know, how filmmakers think about audience and pathways to audience, and they've seen, you know, a massive elevation in applications for both development and production funding. So, you know, they see the value in the work because it helps achieve everyone's goal, which is connecting audiences with screen content, you know, with local screen content. We have the producer offset here. So if you are an offset project, there are obviously some caps around what you can claim as QAPE, qualifying Australian expenditure, for the offset. The offsets are 40, oh, it's actually changing from 40% for features to 30%. They've flattened it with TV. TV used to be 20%, that's coming up to 30, and features are going down to 30. But essentially there are some limits within there. So your website, you know, you can't put more than 15 grand in your budget as a line on your website. However, creating a website to service, you know, a big ambitious impact campaign for 15 grand is going to be challenging. Therefore, we had the balance of what we needed to build the site we wanted sitting in our impact budget. A lot of content wherever possible, it really makes sense. You know, the content you're creating for outreach, like our education clips for our curriculum package, we produced those during production, and it made sense and was not a hurdle to have them sitting in the budget and quapeable. But then something like your actual curriculum resources, there's a cap on a study guideline here. So, you know, we're really working within those parameters, but there's Screen Australia would now welcome an impact producer sitting in, you know, in crew and being on, even in some time allocated in the development budget for early campaign development and scoping. So that's been a big shift. I mean, traditionally they were very siloed, the budgets, and now there is a little bit more bleed, and I think that will increase. And obviously we don't have Good Pitch here in Australia anymore. That's now finished up. It was only here for 3 years. So, you know, something's going to have to give to sort of plug that gap, I think, in terms of funding. But of course, we now have a number of philanthropic donors who've been activated through the Good Pitch process, you know, who are now much more comfortable with the idea of funding both film and film impact.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously our budgets were separate because social impact really did come sort of, you know, when the film was in post-production. I mean, I feel that we have been really well supported by the Film Commission in this particular film, but I would say in general that, you know, New Zealand is, as we said before, well behind Australia, and I think that's in regards to knowledge within the filmmaking community about social impact, but also from the funding agencies in regards to supporting what we can do with social impact. So I would ask them to consider it as a different model that is viable and that that can be commercial as well as you know, doing great work and value, but that it's different, that it's a different release, and that there's a long tail, and that maybe you need, you know, you'll be releasing it certainly not just in theatres. So I would ask that they consider that it could be a successful model, but there has to be an understanding that it's different.
It's kind of like you know, the traditional, I think that probably from my point of view, the Film Commission's perspective is just very much still around, and I know that this is in discussion and changing, but around that theatrical release model. And obviously COVID has changed that, but I think when you take something like social impact into the mix, actually the pie starts to get fuller, and it's kind of like we need them to be looking at the whole pie, not just that theatrical window, not just you know, home ent distribution or VOD distribution, etc. But there's sort of a whole wheel of stuff going on. And even on projects that I've worked on in the past, and I was just privileged. I've done education, you know, had education kits produced for entertainment projects, actually, for feature films, and that was only because the production company that did them had the resource to get those produced in house. It wasn't something that was a line item in the budget. It was separate to that. But I just think that sort of all of the things that you can do around a film project or a screen project could amplify them so much more. And we are all about finding audiences now. You know, where are the audiences? We keep asking these questions, and actually they are there, but you just have to be quite specific about targeting.
And you have to be allowed to try a different model to find the audiences. So I think, but hopefully Good Pitch in New Zealand will change all of this, and there's going to be a dramatic change. And that's very exciting.
I'd just add to that, just in terms of, an ask to Screen Australia, it would really be to have a specific fund for impact work. I mean, it gets lumped in with innovative distribution, alternative distribution, and I think it's, I think it's a very different proposition to a distributor being able to apply for a pot of money to do something unusual and innovative that they are then going to receive be the direct beneficiary of that work financially, versus a film team applying to do impact work that is actually going to service the financiers and investors and other stakeholders. So I used to spend a lot of time, sort of ring fencing and protecting the impact budget, because there were often, sort of attempts to, not any kind of anything untoward, but there was just a lot of opportunism. Oh, you've got some money for that. And I was like, no, that's for next year. No.
Yeah, well, thank you, guys. I think that there are a couple of things that, it's really important from just the last part of the conversation. I think I look forward to the day in which we don't need to call it innovative. We don't need to call impact producer innovative. The impact producer becomes just part of what we do. Yeah, I think that's where we need to go. And I think that one of the things that we were going to have to try to, or hope to learn from Australia, is actually going to be philanthropy. Because New Zealand we do have philanthropy in New Zealand, but not philanthropy for films. And this is one of the things that we do need to develop, and Australia and the US actually have done a lot of great things in this area. And when we can actually start to elevate philanthropy in films, we're going to start seeing a much better allocation of resources for impact producing. So
you need a New Zealand version of DAF.
Yeah, we do, absolutely. Yeah. And on that note, I mean, we are going to be running Good Pitch Aotearoa New Zealand in October next year, and we'll be calling for films to be submitted for consideration. Details of the submission process will be available later this year, but submissions will start early next year. Who knows? I mean, in the future, maybe after we've run one or two of the Good Pitch Aotearoa in New Zealand, maybe it's time to think about Australasia Good Pitch, where we can bring back Australia and New Zealand, bring us together, because we are so similar and yet we're so far away from each other in terms that we could be working so much more together. So on that note, thank you, Anna, for taking the time to come and work with us, because your work is certainly something that, we can all aspire to. And, I hope that anyone, I know Anna's really, really busy and she's got lots of projects on, but, I'm sure if anyone has got an amazing project that might take 3 or 4 years to actually get on the way, get on the blow and talk to Anna. And if you are thinking that there could be a possible way to include an Australian angle.
And I'm very up for being one of the first people to take advantage of the travel bubble once we can come your way. So all invitations gratefully accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex and Tamar, thank you again for all the work that you've done in this area. You've helped to spearhead and lead the area of impact producing in New Zealand. And as we had said from the very beginning, there's no pool because there really isn't any impact producers at the moment. But what you guys have done is that you guys have started to open up the doors for impact producing. So I salute you and thank you again for the work that you've done. So everyone, thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's tuned in today. Really appreciate the fact that you've come to this. We will actually, at some point in time, have a recording of this. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact Lindsay Lee, our Good Pitch Aotearoa New Zealand coordinator. And I'd like to thank her and Keith Barclay, our Doc Edge industry producer, who has been working solidly in the background to help this work. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Doc Society, for coming up with this great idea of Good Pitch. And we look forward to working with all of you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.